Welcome to a new story chapter. Chapter 8, The Rise and Fall of Progress. Author, Charles Pendelton.
Everyone had left, and the house was now quiet, except for the silent shifting of time. Downstairs in a far corner of the living room toward the back of the house, the grandfather clock sits ominously. It is set to go off periodically but has a malfunction in its works to where it will occasionally ring 13 times. Ever watchful is the scowl of the moon locked in its lunar phase, preventing the sun from ever shining. All things break down in time, even grandfather clocks. I listened to the gentle sound of birds waking as they communicated to one another in the form of a song. How soothing is the voice of nature that floods the ears and encaptivates one's spirit in its tranquility. Where we lived, there were only 2 houses on one side of the street and 4 on the other, surrounded entirely by a vast expanse of woods. That was until progress came several years later and turned our refuge into a melting pot of multicultural hodgepodge. It had nothing to do with the fusion of ethnic diversity. It also had nothing to do with the denizens of foreign lands who genuinely strive for a better life, so they leave their war-torn and poverty-stricken countries to settle here. No, this was about the domino effect it created. Houses began to spread like wildfire until nothing remained of our woodlands. It was a desperate attempt to fit as many houses as humanly feasible on 64 acres of land, and during those days, it felt as though we were living on 3 Mile Island, waiting for the reactor to blow. Our peaceful little community had been taken over and transformed into a bustling city block almost overnight. The endless traffic and overpopulation it produced made me feel sorry they bought the house in the first place. We went from living in the country to living in the bowels of an inner-city slum, where people no longer cared about their neighbors or the environment they resided in. The noise and confusion of people coming and going at all hours of the night and the screaming and yelling from parents and children at all hours of the day made the block seem threatening. Just walking up the street to your own house after 9 or 10 in the evening was like passing through a back alley in the heart of gang territory, where nameless delinquents resided and would congregate to conspire. Money was being funneled into various channels to appease man's greed while stirring a cesspool of filth, which were the breeding grounds of our new inhabitants. The peaceful serenity that was generated by a slow-moving brook through a bed of stone was now gone, and the wonderful trails which led to an enormous weeping willow tree would become nothing more than a fond memory. It couldn't have been worse had they built a skyscraper. Our lavish community, which had once flourished, was now dead, and there was no getting around it. A host of unsavory characters took hold of it and burned it to the ground. Through the cracks, they took root and would grow. The late-night whisperings of bitter gossip were a hush-hush out and a tiptoe back inside. Draw the shades and lock the doors. The wayfarers were coming. We turned toward these people with open arms and were met with sneers and slamming doors, for they seemed to have their own agenda. As they marched in, our little community took a turn for the worse. It first started, you could say, when 2 of the neighborhood dogs were found dead, and everyone moved on but us. At least we could say we were warned. It's not like we didn't know what was happening. I think we were just living in denial. The rise of progress gave birth to a host of insipid and immoral creatures, while the foreigners couldn't be bothered communicating with anyone who wasn't of their own race and creed. We weren't about to go door to door, introducing ourselves to these people, nor would we be defeated by them in our leaving. Eventually, with the passing of time, we became friendly with several families in separate dwellings. They would come over to share small talk and stay for a hot dinner on a cold winter's eve or a barbecue in the breast of summer. All was good with them, for they were quaint and charming, and together we would discover what the ground had unearthed. Within the first year, our street was littered with garbage. Plastic bags blew around and ended up in trees, making it appear that you were now entering a white trash neighborhood, while candy wrappers, old newspapers, and tissues turned up in our driveway on a daily basis. Alongside the road, we would find flattened white castle boxes, used condoms, assorted porno magazines, and emptied-out cigarette butts from car ashtrays, among other debris. This went on for years and became a part of the scenery. 2 months after this all started, my mother read in the Sunday paper that a bust had been made a few miles down the road. It appeared that a certain shoe salesman, named Zoran, who bought the house directly across the street, had been polishing more than shoes down at the shoe mart. It seems that this Yugoslavian fellow had taken quite a shine to little boys, and so for the next 12 years, he'll be thinking about them in and out of lockdown. Before the ink had even finished drying from Zoran's caption, a man who moved into one of the end houses lost control of his Dodge pickup, apparently in a drunken rage over a layoff, and plowed into a family of 4 crossing a Brooklyn street in the late evening hours. The parents were both pronounced dead at the scene, along with their oldest daughter. Only the youngest child survived but would be cursed to live his life confined to a wheelchair. The following year, police are called to one of the new houses by a concerned neighbor. They arrive on the doorstep but are not permitted inside. All seemed to be calm, and so the police went about their way. A week later, cops arrive at the house. For the second time, they gained entrance into the home, and everything appeared to be normal, since there were no signs of any physical abuse, and when taken into account that everyone had been cooperating with the officers, there was no reason for them to push the issue. The third time, however, a woman was taken from the house on a hospital gurney and brought into the awaiting ambulance. Only then did she have the courage to press charges against her abusive boyfriend, who pummeled her so badly that she needed to undergo surgery to mend her wounds. He was later caught trying to re-enter the home through a broken window and was immediately apprehended. From there, he was led into the patrol car and taken away. As he was being escorted from the premises in handcuffs, he shouted, "I'm coming back for you, bitch." Tests showed she had suffered a broken jaw, a fractured pelvis, and a ruptured spleen in the attack, not to mention abrasions to her face and neck, along with a series of defensive wounds to both arms and one of her breasts. A month later, she testified against him in court, and from there, upon sentencing, he would spend the next 4 years in the slammer. This is but a sample of the misery that came down our street like a great flood and washed away any hope we had left. We went from a quiet lover's lane to a crowded city street in less than a year. Our paradise would soon become a ghetto because of the overpopulation of migrants who do not care about themselves or anyone around. They wish to live on top of one another like rats with ill regard for the problem it causes. What was the attraction that prompted the general public to drop what they were doing and flock to this island? They came running as if we had just struck oil. It was like watching what would happen if someone opened a free food court in Biafra. Within 6 months, we were to witness firsthand the death of the modern family. It didn't seem to bother them that they paid top dollar for a sliver of a house. To start with, their front yard is a sidewalk. Secondly, the walls are so thin you can hear your neighbor's conversation from your own kitchen. And lastly, the driveway leading into the garage is so inverted that they would immediately have to call a tow truck to hoist it out if they ever pulled a car into it. All they possess is a slice of the American dream that they will abuse until it is gone. Every year the list would metastasize like cancer, with people growing more and more unfriendly by the hour until finally, the birds would sing no more. But let us cast aside these woes, for they are merely things to come. Instead, let us contemplate the acres of woodland that are home to serenity and that of a new morning. It is June the 11th, 1982, and the day is just beginning.
Stay tuned to our channel to hear our next story. Our story novel is now easily available to buy online. The link to the story is given in the description below the video. Stay with us by subscribing our channel to get new novel.